Financially, we're not hurt as much by racism as we are by breaking advertising rules.
What you should have done is done that British thing of just tutting very loudly.
Going into my number 2 then, and that is that City and Chelsea get too much stick for the money. Now, we were talking earlier on the podcast about how Chelsea are effectively buying up players and using them as a business. I don't agree with that, and everything that we'd kind of summarised in that earlier, I think that you were spot on with, Simon. But when you talk about them in terms of winning titles, obviously they get loads of criticism for basically just for buying everyone, which I do kind of get, but at the same time, I kind of feel like the criticism is a little bit harsh. That's effectively my unpopular opinion, because when you look at it, it's really kind of the only way to compete, and it's not like Man United and Liverpool, etc., don't spend money. I think with Liverpool, you can maybe look at net spend because they do sell their players for quite a bit. But when you look at Man United traditionally, and I know they're a big club with a big history and a large global brand, and that really contributes to the money. But at the end of the day, when they're still winning titles, and they've got all these players, say through like Beckham, Giggs, the class of '92, those kind of players. But then on top of that, they're also able to go out and drop, like world record fees on Rio Ferdinand, 30 million quid on teenage Wayne Rooney, stuff like that. I feel like, again, they're not, I'd call it harsh to say they're buying the league, but why, just because they're a brand already, why is it, my kind of thing is, why is it okay for them to go and, spend this huge money that other teams can't compete with? They could basically cherry pick throughout the rest of the Premier League anyone that they thought was even remotely decent would do a job for them. They could effectively just cherry pick from them. But yet then when City and Chelsea get new owners and do the same thing, there's this big thing of, you've just bought the league. And I'm like, well, that is true. But again, it's not like Man United aren't out here spending money that the rest of the Premier League, and not just Man United, other teams as well, but that generally a lot of the lower clubs that will never compete can't spend that kind of money anyway. But it's okay for United to do it because they're a brand. That's kind of my unpopular opinion. I think that City and Chelsea get too much stick in that regard.
If you go back to kind of the big brands with United and that, Chelsea have almost built that now. I think the key here is about it's unsustainable, or it has been unsustainable what Chelsea and City have done, because it has just been money that's not from that sort of, being run as a diligent club and buying properly and kind of doing all of those different things. I think that's kind of the only difference.
I think the unstable thing, I completely agree, because we've seen it before with teams like QPR. Do you remember before they got relegated? They had a higher wage in 2013. They had a higher wage bill than Dortmund did, and Dortmund got to the Champions League final that year. So I get what you mean in terms of an irresponsible kind of sense, but
it's not real. That's what I mean. It's like you're buying up something that's.
I get what you mean, but then also aren't Man United hugely in debt at the minute as well? And they're a global brand.
Stupidly in debt.
Yeah, exactly. So they're stupidly in debt right now. And as I said, I feel like because they have this history, even, going back to before the pre-Fergie era, of being this traditional big English club, this huge, the obviously the Premier League inflated that in terms, but globalization, the internet and all that all helps. But Chelsea and City kind of get looked down upon in the sense of, you've just had to buy your success, which
new money,
obviously
right?
they have. There's no getting away from it. They have, but then in order for it's just the way that I feel like they get stick for it when it's the way that football is shifted. Realistically, the only way, other than Leicester, which was a freak year, a freak season, right? The only way you can compete now, or you can hope to compete, we're all sitting here praying that one day, it doesn't matter what club you are, that one day a Qatari prince or billionaire or whoever comes into our club and goes, right, and they're not going to lose interest either, and goes, right, I want to build a football club to be amazing. I'm going to pump billions into it. That's really the dream. Yeah. And that's the only way realistically that you're going to be able to compete with the Uniteds, with the Chelseas, with the Liverpools, because it is in such a, they've got so much money, they can compete in so many different ways.
It's a positive feedback loops again, isn't it? It's about, building up something, and then that success just emanates more success, and it makes it very difficult for the lower level clubs. I know we spoke about this.
Yeah, but I think the thing that I find with that talk about money is how many times do you see clubs throw money at a problem and it goes absolutely bloody nowhere? Like, just because you throw money at a team doesn't necessarily make the team successful. Recruitment's still got to be good. You got to be
I completely agree.
But money isn't just transfers. Smart money is, I'm going to buy an academy. I'm going to buy great scouts. I'm going to buy great.
But that to me is a little bit different than throwing money at the first team, because actually that's building up your club, like trying to put the roots,
the infrastructure, basically.
Yeah, and that's not. You talk about like if the money goes, then what's the issue? Well, if you leave that structure in place, you actually can probably take the money away to some extent and still be successful, because you've got all the pieces in place to still be successful without the money. I think, like, you look at City, I know that their scouting and their how they find transfer targets, they're really diligent on it and how they do it. They sit down, the chief exec, the scouts, the manager, sit down and discuss the transfers, and they pick a target, and everyone's on the same page, and they have a really clear strategy of where the team's going and what they want from it. And that is doing it smart. Yes, you still have to spend a lot of money, because good players cost a lot of money. That's just how football is. Even from lower league, you talk about cherry picking from lower league, Premier League sides. Even doing that now is not that cheap, because they know what their jewels are. They know that they need those players to survive in the league. So,
George, would you say that perhaps I think the reason it gets so much stick probably is because a lot of people see it's ruining the spirit of the competition.
To a degree, and as I said, I like it is. As I said, I think it is true to a certain extent. I just kind of think it's such a lazy criticism. I feel like when people go, "Oh, City, Chelsea, they've just bought their league titles," I feel like they're almost not looking at the whole picture, at least in terms of the way that football works nowadays. In that you're criticising these teams for doing that, but when that's really the only way that a team that's, say, not traditionally the biggest club can compete, because we spoke earlier on the podcast actually about potentially having a draft system or something like that in place. And, so like in 2003, Man United won the Premier League, and then I think they came second in 2004. Obviously, 2004 was the year that Arsenal won the Invincibles. That summer, they go and shell out £30 million on Wayne Rooney, which at the time, I'm sure that must have been the world record fee for a teenager. I'm sure it must have been the world record fee for a teenager. And then again, a few years down the line, 30 million on Berbatov and players like this, again, from Spurs who are looking to grow. And it's almost a lack of fairness throughout the footballing system. And yet it's Man City and Chelsea that are the biggest, say, like,
I see what,
they get targeted the most because they have spent this money. And I'm like, well, yes, but Man United finished second the year before. How is it fair that they go to basically rid Everton of their best player at that point for £30 million?
Yeah. And
Everton yes, Everton have got £30 million to then reinvest back in the team, but they're not going to have the drawing power. They're not just going to be able to spend that £30 million on the equivalent of a Wayne Rooney at the time, because the equivalent of Wayne Rooney at the time isn't going to go there. He's going to go to Real Madrid or whoever.
Well, I think the other thing with it, like, I know we spoke before about kicking away the ladder. That's essentially what it is. It's like, we're at the top and we don't want anyone else up here, so you lot can't do it. That's essentially what it boils down to. United wanted to be the only team that could do it. Now you've got 3 or 4 or 5 Premier League sides that can just go. And
you've got to think as well. You've got to think as well, without the Roman Abramovich and Sheikh Mansour going to Chelsea, Man City, really, over the last 15, 20 years or so, the Premier League would have only been won by Man United, Arsenal, possibly Liverpool. That would be it. Yeah. That would be it. There wouldn't be... And as I said, like for a good long while, you knew the top 4 was always going to be Man United, Arsenal, Liverpool, Chelsea in any kind of order. But you knew that would be the top 4 every year. And then maybe Everton, Villa, 5th and 6th every year. And the fairness, the way that the Premier League payments have kind of spread out somewhat has helped make it more competitive. I certainly think, there's almost leagues within leagues now of the Premier League, and it certainly helps that. But and you made a good point earlier in terms of money. People that don't give, say, Guardiola credit for what he has done at City, I do think there's an element of ignorance to that, because we've seen since Alex Ferguson left that Man United have spent the best part of £1 billion. No one really rips into them the way that they rip into a City or Chelsea for spending, again, similar amounts of money. But Man United, at least in terms of the league, they've got nowhere with it. I mean, all right, they're in the title race at the minute, but they've had no league title since Fergie left, despite spending nearly £1 billion. And yet, there's not many, well, I'll say not many, there's a good chunk of people that will sit there and go, oh yeah, well, Guardiola's achieved nothing. Look at his team. Look at the money he can spend on. Well, there's a difference between just throwing money at a wall and hope it sticks, and having a proper plan in place and being able to coach players to get them to be the best they possibly can be. You look at the way that Raheem Sterling, Kevin De Bruyne, etc. There's a whole list of those players that have just come on leaps and bounds since Guardiola's been there. And yes, they've got better players, better facilities, but it's not just because they've launched money at it, which I do think is such an easy and lazy argument that a lot of people use to criticise what goes on at City and Chelsea and why they are where they are.
Yeah, no, I think it's a couple of things. I think it's the consistency in which they spend money. It's not like, they'll have a window where they spend a bit and then for the next 4 or 5 years, okay, this is our team. I think that's what gets a lot of the eye. But I agree, Manchester United spends loads of money. Lots of teams spend a load of money. I'd say the only difference, as you said, is that City have set up a really good scouting structure so that when they buy a player, they normally don't buy it for ridiculous money. And they come in and he slits into a system and he does well, he develops and his value.
Yeah, I mean,
they must, if they look to sell most of the squad, I would be surprised if they did make profit on that.
I mean, I was going to say, if you think about the amount of players City have bought, how many of them can you say have been absolutely atrocious? There's a couple, but generally, you'd say most of them have paid off in some respect or another.
Yeah.
They've done the job that they were supposed to do.
They're never massive transfer values either. I can't think it was the last big.
Rodri was
I think some are about 50, 60 million at most for City, I think.
Thought Rodri was 30.
But if you look, Liverpool has spent 70 million on Alisson. So it's if you put it in that context, it's just what it is to buy top players. It's not like a Neymar 200 million, is it?
No.
That's what you're saying. It's not this hyper sum of money which you get with some teams like PSG.
Yeah.
150 million Mbappe, 200 million Neymar. That's crazy money.
That is crazy money, but even then, I mean, it's what they think that they need to do in order to compete in the Champions League. Obviously at the minute they've got the French league pretty much sewn up for years and years to come. It would be at any point over the next 5 to 10 years, unless there's another team that gets taken over in a similar way, we're all going to expect PSG to win the league comfortably every single year. And it's more of a thing that I feel like if you've got a problem with teams like City, Chelsea, PSG, yes, they are spending lots of money and you might go, oh, it's frustrating that they can do that because they've got more resources than other teams. But then I feel like you've really got more of a problem with this current economic system in place in football rather than City, Chelsea, PSG, etc. Because as I said earlier, we're 2 West Ham fans, you're an Ipswich fan. If you said tomorrow, oh, you're going to get taken over by some Qatari billionaire or whatever, we're going to be jumping for joy, going, oh my God, we could potentially be winning things in 5-10 years time. Because that's what football was reduced us to, because we know that even on the off chance if we do get an unknown player in for a small fee and they turn out to be great, or if we get some players come through our academy that look like they're going to be megastars, eventually they're going to go to Real Madrid or they're going to go to a Man United or somewhere like that, and we're not going to be able to compete them. And it keeps the top clubs as top clubs and the smaller clubs just constantly striving but never quite getting there.
It's positive feedback loops. I know I keep saying it. I'm a feedback loop in itself. But yeah, it's and I don't know what it needs. An interesting idea that Formula One had was that you rotate the best drivers around all the different teams throughout the season, so that you start to spread out, and then the idea is that the best drivers kind of get a pick at all the different things. I'm not sure if I think a draft pick or something like that might have a similar effect where
I agree.
The bottom teams get the thing. The problem where it becomes unstuck is that the money isn't distributed half as evenly around the league or leagues.
Yeah, it's even worse in Europe, to be
lower
fair.
league teams would never be able to afford contracts for first-star draft picks because, some clubs would be able to, but...
No, it would really take a whole readdressing of the system, to be honest with you. And even then, England is kind of a problem enough. But when you look at Spain and in Spain, Real Madrid and Barcelona, I'm pretty sure their TV money, those two clubs take 66% of that. Yeah. And then the rest of La Liga has to make do with the 33 that's left over. That's crazy that it's distributed like that. But that's the system they've got in place there. So in somewhere like Barcelona, Real Madrid, it's even harder than it would be to do something like that here.
No, you're right. I think you're right. So I think we're fortunate to have like a six big clubs.
Yeah. So, I mean, as I said, the system as a whole kind of needs to be addressed. I just think that criticism of Chelsea or Man City in that sense, I just think it's a bit of a lazy argument and not quite ignorant of what the actual problem in football is.
It's quite hypocritical as well, as you said before. It's like, well, we can do it, but you're not allowed to because we can do it. We're the only ones that should be allowed to do it. It's like, well, no. That's why I was really against that Project Big Picture I know we spoke about before, because that was going to put the voting rights with like 8 teams or whatever it was. Yeah. And they would have had the ability to block owners coming into clubs. So you would never ever see like a new billionaire owner getting a team up the leagues. That wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
It was that was why that was a real problem with that. Yeah. Just trying to create this closed shop mentality. We're the big clubs and we don't want anyone else touching us.
I mean, hypothetically, this shouldn't be an issue because FFPs was brought in to try and stop some of this stuff. That's what we were told.
I was going to say, to be fair,
it doesn't really
we've
work.
Had great examples of it working, have we, to be honest?
That's the problem. We've got a bunch of examples of it not working more than working. And I mean, it speaks volumes that team or the owners and teams think they can still get bought out and have loads of money invested with them when there's supposed to be a system in place to prevent that.
Well, actually, to be fair, I will, because obviously I have kind of defended Chelsea and City on this, but obviously in both of those two teams at some point over the last couple of years, they have breached those rules. I mean, not City the financial fair play, Chelsea the youth player one, and so anyone slamming them for that specifically, I think is fair because they've broken the rules that are there. But when you're talking generally about the money that they spend and that, as I said, I think it's just a bit of a lazy, ignorant argument. But when you're talking specifically about City actually, breaking financial fair play rules, which they only found out about because that guy leaked it. Yeah. And as soon as that came out, I knew, because there was this big thing of, are City going to be booted out the Champions League? Not a chance in hell were they going to get booted out the Champions League. Not a chance in hell.
Did you see the court case? He saw Sheikh Mansour turning up with this team of 30 lawyers behind him. UEFA was so fucked. Yeah. They had just had this fucking legal team that was just impossible.
You've got to think of the stature that man has in the globe, and they're gonna potentially lose that revenue stream by penalising them, by kicking them out the Champions League for 2 years. Not in a million years was City ever going to feel the ramifications of breaking that.
The problem is, though, you never set up.
I mean, it's almost the mantra, it's the too big to fail thing, isn't it? That's kind of where we're at a point of. UEFA can't afford to kick big teams out their big tournaments because they lose money from it.
Exactly.
But that means that they will never face any repercussions for breaking the rules, so they can break the rules. And that gets you to about feedback. There it goes again. You're not going to get penalised for breaking the rules, so you're just going to break them. Obviously, I mean, it was that's why it's incredible in rugby. Saracens broke this was like the European champions at the time, broke the salary cap, got relegated. They relegated them to the second division. So that shows like the RFA taking a massive stance against what is one of the biggest clubs in the country and in Europe, which is very brave. But I could never see that happening here. Can you imagine if they tried to relegate City to the Championship? There is absolutely not a chance.
Exactly. Not under the current system. It's impossible, really. But yeah, as I said, in terms of like generally speaking, City, Chelsea bought their league title. I just think it's a lazy argument. I just think that's my unpopular opinion.
Yeah.
That was my number 2. We already had my number 1. So going into your number 1, Matt, what is your champion unpopular opinion?
My champion unpopular opinion. I don't think it'll be controversial amongst us. But I'm pretty sure it'll be controversial. I know it's been controversial amongst others, and it's of my opinion that UEFA, FIFA, and the FA have not done enough to combat racism within football, from within clubs, from in fans. The fact in 2019 we had England players have monkey noises chanted at them, and there was very little punishment for it, really. They got, a couple of weeks ban and a fight. It's just ridiculous. I don't think they take it seriously. I think they just want to look like they're taking it seriously, so that if anyone goes, this is a massive problem in football, they could go, oh no, we've set up a committee to deal with it. I think, I just don't think it's either got the backing, and I, honest to God, don't think they care enough to tackle it as a challenge. I think it's getting better, and I think as more influential people are talking about the subject, it's getting better.
Honestly, man, I don't like, because I do think everything you said about UEFA, FIFA, and the FA there, I do think you're kind of spot on with. And I mean, maybe we've just been in different circles. I've not really heard, apart from, say, probably the most EDL type person there is imaginable. I've not really heard anyone that doesn't think that these organisations are doing enough, because they're clearly not, and it's clearly not on. There's so many different avenues we can take this down, from the amount of, say, black managers within the Football League. That's something that affects England domestically. Obviously, every nation's a little bit differently, but then of course you think of like the Euro qualifiers that we had recently, that over the last couple of years. So a couple of those, was it in Montenegro? I think that was the one, because I know that Sterling didn't Sterling score. He set up. It
was either Montenegro or Kosovo, and I can't remember which one.
Possibly both, if not one of them. Possibly both. And Sterling has really sort of been the unofficial flag bearer of the anti-racism campaigns, which is so he should be. We've seen. We talked about Marcus Rashford and what he's doing for hungry children in the UK. It's really nice to see footballers using their position to implement change. But yeah, you're 100% correct, and I don't think even remotely unpopular in slamming UEFA and FIFA and the FA as well to a certain degree in regards to how they have tackled these issues. Because don't get me, I think as a nation, especially with how multicultural we are, I think we are getting better. And I think if you compared us to a number of different countries throughout Europe, I think that we're quite tolerant. But that doesn't mean that there isn't an issue in this nation, and it doesn't mean that because we're a little bit better than, say, Russia or whoever, even Spain and stuff to a certain degree.
It's not pat yourselves on the back because you're the least racist of the racists.
Exactly.
That's
a lot of people
stupid.
do see it that way, though. No, it is stupid, but a lot of people do see it that way, and a lot of people kind of go, "Oh, well, we're not throwing bananas on the pitch every game."
Great, wasn't that long ago we were doing that?
When you look at the amount of former black players that this country has had, and how many of them are managing in the National League, whether it's down to individual prejudiced clubs or whatever, that it's one thing.
That's why they brought in the Rooney Rule, wasn't it? In football.
In the States, in NFL.
But I thought they brought it in over here. I think it's a thing.
I heard them talk. Did they bring it in for certain? I heard them talking about it.
Just for people, what is it?
So it's you have to interview a black candidate or ethnic candidate for any managerial post that you put up. So it was brought in the NFL because they had the same problem. All the coaches were super white.
But even then, that rule, I would say, it doesn't really. I don't want to say it doesn't do enough, because at the end of the day, if let's say you're a racist chairman owner, or, you've seen this Rooney Rule and you've gone, right, we've got to interview someone. That means they'll just interview them, but they won't they won't even really pay attention. They'll just interview them to say they've interviewed them, tick the box. Yeah, we've done that. Right, now we'll bring in the guy that we actually want because fuck you.
Well, I would argue if you're a racist chairman or football club owner or whatever, you shouldn't be running a football club to start with, and you shouldn't be allowed to be influential both over the selection of a manager, but also over a selection of players who will most likely, at least a handful of them, will be from an ethnic minority background.
You've got to think of what goes on at certain clubs though as well, because I do agree. You would hope that someone in that position of power isn't that way inclined, but depending on where you're from, depending on how you've been brought up, your own background, people do have certain prejudice over certain thing. And I'm trying to think back. It was a couple of years or so ago now. I think we had a coach, West Ham. I think we had a coach that we had to sack because he basically said that something along the lines of African players are trouble. Yeah. I think it was shortly after we got rid of Cheku Kouyaté. And to be fair to the club, it was someone like that. Yeah, someone like a head scout or our head of transfers. Yeah. And to be fair to the club, straight away they just went and sacked him. But you've kind of got to think if someone of that mindset can be in a position of influence at a Premier League club like West Ham, there's issues not only amongst the system, but you do see it with football fans, not as I said, not to the degree that you see in certain countries like Russia and places like that, but there's an underlying ugliness that exists within the FA, and they're just not tackling it properly. I think a lot of people don't see it as an issue, but UEFA especially. I think there's how many examples are there of times where fans have been racist at a stadium, and then they've sent the FA of that nation, or the equivalent of the FA of that nation, like a 10 grand fine.
I know it's because I remember the situation. This was a few years ago, but I remember when Bentner had those boxes of the Euros that said paddy power.
I know exactly where you're going with this.
He was fined £30,000 for that. The Serbian FA in an under-21 game got racist abuse. They got £20,000. So you're finding an individual more for breaking your advertising regime than you are for finding a country for being racist during a football match. That's insane. And if you don't think that's insane, you're part of the problem.
No, it's completely wrong. It's completely wrong. But obviously they're probably seeing it as, financially, we're not hurt as much by racism as we are by breaking advertising rules. So that's why they've clamped down on that harder. And it is wrong. It's completely wrong. But yeah, as I said, to be honest with you, Matt, the only thing that I would say, I really don't, apart from say within people within those organisations, and again, you're going to get the odd, EDL twat that's going to go, it's not an issue when it really is. But I would say that probably the vast majority of football fans are aware that there's a big issue domestically within the FA, but then also within UEFA and FIFA as well, because it clearly is.
I think they do. The only controversial thing, because there's different levels of it, right? And it can be perceived in lots of different ways. The most overt ways are just, it's probably the most disrespectful thing in football that happened at least in my generation, to basically say, we don't really give a fuck if you're going to get racial abuse, personally. That's very overt and very obvious, right?
That's the message it sends
out. It's very
out.
overt.
Yeah.
But then you're right, and you raised a really good point, because it's also about diversity and inclusion. And my company, lots of companies will have to have, especially once you get to a certain size, diversity and inclusion personnel. And there's a reason why that. I work for a very overtly white traditional English company. So we have to put effort into diversifying our organisation.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure if that's something that's in place in football. I don't know. I'm not saying no.
I think probably on the business side, I'd say probably not on the football side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd say probably back office, they have those in place. But they don't seem to have it for like coaching staff, for management staff, for. I mean, you look at even at the players in the league now. I mean, it's so diverse. You don't have a side that's like all white English. Like that's just not a thing anymore.
Yeah.
Like every club, like going through the pyramid. Like it used to be like only the Premier League has foreign players. Now, like all the way through, every club will have a foreign player, like players of different ethnicities. And it's been good for football. Like let's not be like the Premier League is better for it. And so we do need to make sure that those. I mean, you saw the booing at Colchester when they took the knee, and you're like,
yeah,
how that is still an acceptable stance in this day and age. I don't know. And in fairness to their chairman, he was like, if you boo during that, I don't want you at the club. Like, took a very hard-line response to it, which is great.
At least in terms of domestically, and obviously this will affect every nation differently, but domestically, it highlights that there's more of an issue with society. Like, it's not just football, it's a society issue as well. And the only way that you can probably truly at least begin to eradicate racism or prejudice within football is to first try and eradicate it within society, because football is always going to kind of be, society is always going to be reflected within football to a certain degree.
And I think you see that in terms of how far. I mean, I know you don't want to say like pat yourself on the back but you look at football in the 80s and how horrendous it was in terms of the abuse that black players would get during a game. We are so far removed from that position, and that is good. It should be applauded that we have found a way. But I think you're right. It came from a step change in society. I think back then society was overtly racist.
It was.
No, and then football was worse. Now society's better. Football's better, but still behind.
It's everyone's responsibility.
Yeah.
Obviously, the people with the money are highly responsible. That's not a word, but I mean, they're the most responsible because they've got a very real way of impacting it. But it's also fans' responsibility.
Yeah, I think
when
fans
we go
need to
back,
police themselves.
Yeah, we need to make sure that we manage it amongst ourselves. You know, I'm a West Ham fan. I've heard all sorts of shit being said, and I can sit up and say I haven't done enough to tell someone to shut the fuck up and say certain things. I'm all for giving the away fans stick. I think it's an important part of football, but you know, there's a very obvious line there where you're just being a prick.
I don't know. You kind of raised an interesting point there, Matt. And again, maybe it really depends on where you sit and what part of like the stadium you're in. To be fair, I've heard probably just about everything under the sun at West Ham as far as say swearing and stuff goes. But and maybe it's because there was pretty much next to me there was a black man who I used to sit next to when I had my season ticket, and quite a few different people with different ethnicities sitting with me. Maybe it was just the luck of where I was sitting. But as a result of that, I probably never really heard anything racist or anything like that while I was at West Ham. Again, maybe because people are aware, even prejudiced people are aware enough not to, even if they're thinking it, not to say those kind of things when they are stood next to a black man. They're not going to say something like that for fear of, him turning around and lamping in one like he would be justified in doing had they said that. So I've not really, at least not in the stadium, I've not really experienced anything like that.
I have. I don't think, I'm not under the illusion that it's happening, obviously, I've just got the unfortunate. I'm in the fucking cheap seats, so I'm with all the scum. But the only real instance I've heard of it, it's not been directed towards black players. It's been directed towards Muslim players. So Mo Salah.
That's bad. Example. No, that is bad then, and that's probably why. Because to be fair, there's probably not, at least because Mo Salah is obviously probably the most famous Muslim player in the world right now, you'd have to think.
Yeah,
and that even though there are obviously plenty of players that are Muslim within the Premier League, it's probably not as advertised as what it is with Mo Salah. But that's horrific. But it's an interesting one. It's an interesting one to be in terms of like, where do you stand and how do you kind of react to it? Because obviously with everything going on with COVID, there's been things, ignorant fucking things, stupid fucking things said about like China, that kind of thing. And I remember it was probably shortly after, it was probably shortly into first lockdown, probably around April, maybe May of last year. And I went to Tesco's, and I was on my way out from Tesco's, and there was the security guard in there, like, just chatting. I don't know who he was chatting to, I can't remember now, but he said something along the line. He was effectively blaming China, like there's a Chinese takeaway across the road, and he said, "Oh, they've packed up," and he's gone, "It's a bit funny they've packed up. It's their fault. It's here." That was basically what he said. And if he wasn't some 6'6", massive unit of a geezer, I would have turned around and said, "No, fuck off, mate. You're a dickhead." Like, it was as I was walking out the shop, but because of the size of the geezer, and I was like, if I say something here, like, because it really made me feel fucking sick, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But I was like, is me potentially getting my head caved in going to solve anything? Because even if I try to rationally discuss it with this man, is he going to have the mindset to go, "Oh, actually, you've opened my eyes here," or is he going to go, "No, fuck off, you cunt"? Of course, like, so yeah, I've kind of like just sheepishly walked past with my fucking like Tesco carrier bag, thinking, oh, like that, like just fuming.
What you should have done is done that British thing of just tutting very loudly and walking away.
But again, even that, I kind of feel like, oh, I don't want to upset this geezer because he's like twice as tall as I am and a trained security guard.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know what you mean. It's kind of because we all like to think that we would do the right thing in that scenario, and if it was like one of our friends or family in an enclosed, you'd be disappointed and pull them up on it. But in that kind of situation, you're not going to, and I know you feel like you should do more, but when you hear someone abusing Mo Salah like that, you're not going to turn around and say to this guy, "No, fuck off," unless you've got, unless you've real character in you, like a real strong
I think
character.
I think we've just got to normalise reporting people, getting people kicked out of stadiums.
But
for it.
I was going to say, I think the issue with that, though, is it's so hard to prove that someone has done that. Because it's like, unless you've got a camera pointed directly at them, like they can easily say, "I didn't say that." And then how the hell do you prove it? Unless you get witnesses. A group of people around you also coming forward.
Yeah, well, there's
like the only people who get caught are the people who are stupid enough and they've got a camera directly in their face. Like the Chelsea guy was abusing Raheem Sterling.
Yeah.
Like, and the camera was on him directly. It's like, well, clearly he said it. The camera's there. You can see it. But most places in the stadium, like, you will not know. We've
got this thing, and maybe it's a Premier League club thing, or maybe it's a recent thing, but at the London Stadium, every kind of like section of the stadium, I guess, they've got a person there where you can report stuff to. And I think it's really simple. I think there's a phone number. I think you just record them on your fucking phone and you send them a video and you text it to them. And the steward comes and goes, "Yeah, mate, you're fucking out." Or if it comes to it, you just get 4 or 5 witnesses. I know everyone I sit around at West Ham, and they're all like lovely people that I'm sure who'd be just as disappointed as seeing that sort of shit as I do. It doesn't have a place in football. It shouldn't do. Again, I didn't think it'd be controversial. I knew it was going to be controversial against us, but
yeah, it's a bit of a weird one. I think it really depends on. Again, it goes beyond the realms of football. This is the thing. This you could quite easily talk about that in something that's not even related to football generally, because it's a big issue. It's just it shines football, whether it's something bad or whatever. It shines the light on it. So yeah, no, that was a solid. That was an interesting number one there, Matt. So Simon, your number one, mate.
So my number one is that I believe that EFL, Football League, Championship, League 1, League 2 is more exciting generally than the Premier League.
Well, I'm glad we're on a bit of a lighter topic. Okay, yeah. I'm glad we're on a bit of a lighter topic. So, would you like to state your case as to why?
Yeah, so I'm not talking quality. Take quality out of it. That's not the point I'm making. I think it's the fact that you never know what's going to happen. Particularly the last 3 or 4 seasons of the Premier League, where you have teams just running away with it. Nothing's interesting. Everyone knows what's going to happen. From like March, you know roughly what's going to happen. In the Championship, like you go into the final day with like 4 teams still being with a chance of the top 2 places. Like that happens so regularly. Like every year that happens. Like last season, 3 teams could have gone up that final day. So everyone's and to the final whistle, no one knows what's going to happen. One goal here or there changes the picture completely. Like I remember, so during that final day as well, 4 teams could have got relegated and 2 were going to go down. And like I think every team at one stage or another was in the relegation slot based on the results at one stage. Eventually, I think it was Charlton and Wigan who got relegated. And I just think that there's just a lot more. There's so many more crazy results in the Championship. Like you get these 4-4s all over the place. And I was thinking about it. I think the reason it happens is because even the teams at the top, you sense us a little bit more fragile than the teams at the top of the Premier League because a lot of them are relegated sides. So they're still a little bit. They've still got a bit of that fragility of if you get them, they can be beaten by teams that you wouldn't necessarily think they would be. But yeah, I just think, and I love the playoffs. The playoffs are just like the best fun. Like they're always amazing. Like they always throw up great. Apart from the final, the final's usually a bit rubbish because, and I think it goes back to this. I nearly put this in as well, but I think it's linked. I think most big games in the Premier League tend to be quite dull. Like I think so. So we had United Liverpool on the other week. It was 0-0. It was utter dross. Like the game is because it's a game that both teams don't want to lose, and therefore they don't. I just think how many big games are 0. Like that was the 4th 0-0 between United and Liverpool out of the last 9. So that's a common theme. I think United City as well, same thing. Both teams were too afraid to lose the game to actually go and win it. And I just don't think we get that mentality in the Championship. Everybody like, as I say, I'm not talking quality, but there's a mentality of everyone's having a go. And there's crazy results because of it. And I think from that regard, it's just exciting. Like you could turn on a Championship fixture and be like, this could go any way. And as I say, I think the Premier League this year has been a bit more interesting because there's been a few shock results. But the last few years, I think the Premier League's been like, okay, it's great from a quality perspective. City and Liverpool have been ridiculously good. So from that regard, quality, brilliant. But from an entertainment value, I'm like, well, is it that interesting watching City knock another 4 past lower mid-table side? Not really.
And the thing to remember is that a lot of the Premier League is made up of kind of, no disrespect to these teams at all, but like, Burnley, Newcastle, West Ham versus West Brom.
I mean, you look at City, Burnley. I mean, you know they're going to win that game 5-0. Every time that game is on, City knocked 5.
Yeah.
And it's like...
We celebrated. And when... Who was it that... it was they beat 1-0. Was it Burnley?
Beat Liverpool.
Beat Liverpool. Yeah. Recently. And that was such an exciting game. And yeah, but those are few and far between.
Well, by the fact that was Liverpool's first home defeat in 70 games.
Well, yeah, that's definitely perfect. And to lose to Burnley that didn't have a lot of the ball or any of the ball really. But I would say, firstly, playoffs are 100% with you. I love playoffs. I wish we could integrate them into the Premier League in some way.
Playoffs for Champions League places, I would say. Honestly, I would say because you talk about the playoffs are great. I would say Champions League spot. So maybe give like top 2, but then the other 2, I would say maybe if you had from like
playoff.
Yeah. I would say maybe from like 8th to 4th. I would say but they won't do that because they want statistically the team that's finished 4th or 3rd, they think will do best in Europe because, West Ham, Southampton, whatever, we might sneak a 7th and 8th, not just this season, but in seasons past as well. A Southampton, a Villa, someone like that might sneak a 7th and 8th. And they don't want to run that risk of them potentially like knocking out a Chelsea or a Liverpool or whoever over the course of like a 1-game playoff or something, and then losing all of their games in the group stage of the Champions League. So they would never do that.
I'm also not sure what UEFA's guidelines are for that. Like, I imagine they probably have a thing that says league position is it, or a cup, and those are the only two metrics to qualify.
Possibly.
I don't think they'd be like, oh, you can do it something clever and interesting like that, because I've not heard of anyone doing it. But anyway,
To be fair, I would say from a competitive point of view, I would agree. I would say that the championship probably is. It's definitely more competitive. To be honest, I think you get crazier results, and this season's such a ridiculous season. But I think it's also in part because of last season and the pandemic and everything that's been going on. But no, I would say that this season's probably been, at least in my opinion, I imagine you probably feel the same way, Simon. This is the most entertaining Premier League season since City won the league in 2012.
Yeah, because you go into games not knowing how it's going to go. It's that thing of, once you know what's going to happen, like the thing that makes football exciting is anything can happen. That's the most exciting part of it. And if you go to a game knowing that that's not really the case, and it's like, City are 99.99% going to win the game. It's like, well, at that point, do I care?
The thing on the Premier League is, for me, is that I would say that in terms of a balance between competitiveness and quality, I would say that out of Europe, I would say that the Premier League is the best, and I would say that's probably why it's the most revered league in the world. But from a competitive standpoint alone, and as you said, the shock factor and the what's going to happen, you can't predict it. It's so difficult. I would say that the Championship is a more interesting league, but obviously it comes at the sacrifice of that quality, which is why the Premier League is considered to be, the be all and end all of English football.
But don't disregard the quality of the Championship. There's some very, very good teams there.
Yeah, I'm not saying there isn't, but obviously...
I reckon you could... they would compete in the top leagues in France, top leagues probably... they are good, very, very good sides, some of these teams. And some of the games are really high standard. I mean, I was talking about the gap between League One and the Championship getting bigger. And you see it. You watch a Championship game, you're like, if this was a Premier League fixture, I can see it. Like, the teams in it have put on enough of a spectacle. But... yeah, I don't know what it is. There is a mentality thing that I don't know. There just seems to be like 5-4s just out of nowhere, and I can't put my finger on why those sort of results.
I will say this, because one of the things that I really enjoy about that aspect is that someone could potentially be promoted from League One to the Championship and then win the Championship that season, which
back to back.
That can never happen in the Premier League. Yeah. It will never happen. It will never happen. Whereas for the footballing landscape in the Championship you've seen teams maybe get consecutive promotions. Well, that is incredible. That does show you how competitive it is.
That's sort of what I was saying, though, because you've got the teams relegated who come in the league with a bit of fragility of, we've not been very good. You get the teams coming up who are absolutely riding on the crest of a wave. And you'd think that these teams are much better because they've been in the top division. But actually these lot are kind of pushing their way forward. They're playing with such supreme confidence that they can just go and turn over a team that you would think they would be beaten by. And as I say, and it's also the fact that the league, because the league is so competitive, the final day, that nothing's usually decided by the final day in the Championship. Usually the Premier League, by the final day, you know who's going up.
More often than not.
You usually know two of the three relegated sides.
Yeah, I'd say more often than not, it's usually only the top four that's still...
yeah, and that's...
yeah.
And while interesting, it doesn't have the same thing of...
you can't really get behind
it. You're getting the ultimate goal of promotion. I get Champions League is important, but 5th, 4th, there's not a great deal in it for the big sides, I don't think. But... that's what I mean. But go to the final day of the Championship, there's usually, you could have no teams knowing if they've been relegated yet. Usually the league's up for grabs. Usually there's an automatic promotion place up for grabs. And there's always a playoff place up for grabs. And in that regard, maybe I'm speaking mostly about that. But that last day drama, I don't think you can ever beat it in the Championship. The only last day drama, really, Premier League-wise, was 2012. Real proper... and 94 maybe, but that's 2 examples out of however many years of Premier League. Yeah. Championship, you could probably find 4 examples from the past 5 seasons. Yes. That's what I love. It's fantastic.
Yeah. There was a little bit of a scare 2000 and 18, 19? When
Brighton scored.
Brighton scored.
Brighton scored against
But,
City.
it's
in
not the same
2019,
as... Yeah. No, I would say it's definitely unpopular.
But I don't think from a competitive point of view, I mean, it might be unpopular, but I don't think it's inaccurate. I would say competitively, the Championship is definitely more competitive.
I think the competition makes it exciting. That's my point. The competitive nature of it makes it more exciting. Because, let's say, games can go any which way and you just have no idea going into it. You get teams bottom of the league rocking up away to the team top of the league and turning them over. Like, where the fuck did that come from?
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Actually, going back quickly to the prospect of a playoff, and this would be kind of horrible, but I think also I think it'd be really entertaining. If so, instead of top 4 or a European places playoff, we have a relegation playoff. So you have teams that finish bottom, 20 and 19th, they're gone. But then you have 18th, 17th, and then 16th, 15th in a playoff, and then the lose, like, you know, I mean, it'd be a bit difficult.
Well, no. So this was part of Project Restart. Was what they were talking about doing was having bottom 2 relegated, but then the playoff winner of the Championship then faces the team in 17th,
right?
In the Premier
Yeah,
League,
yeah.
or 18th in the Premier League, and that's. Which I think is really harsh because one team's had to go through a fucking tough playoff round and another team has like weeks to prepare. So I don't think it would work. But that's sort of similar to what you're saying. But that was part of that proposal.
It would be cool.
More playoffs. Let's agree on that. Yeah. More playoffs. We want loads more playoffs.
Because even then it actually stops the mid-table teams then really like getting the flip-flops out. Because then if you're, let's say there was a playoff to potentially get in the Champions League, if you're sat around 10th, you could be sitting there thinking, well, actually, if we can shift it to 8th, we've got a chance here. And then, or if there was one for a relegation battle, again, if you're around 11th, 12th, maybe even 13th, you're going to be looking over your shoulder thinking, oh, fuck. Like, I can't just take my foot off the gas here. So I think it would ensure that teams keep trying to perform to the highest possible standard they can for as long as they possibly can.
Because I remember seeing that thing a couple of years ago, and I think it was City and Chelsea when Mourinho was still there and Pellegrini. It was like 8 years ago, and it didn't end up happening in the end. But there was this conversation about what happens at the end of the season if they're tied for points, goal difference, forwards and against, and they go into, apparently, if all other scenarios to decide the winner, they'll have a one-off final, essentially. I'm not obviously, if you've been the best team, being not like, you know, if you've been the best team and you're 30 points ahead of number 2, it would be very frustrating. It would, for neutrals, it'd be very exciting. I would love to see like Liverpool versus City on a final for the Premier League title.
Yeah,
that would be crazy.
They won't do it.
They won't do it. Entertainment.
I sort of agree that it shouldn't happen. As you say, like when you're 30 points ahead, you've earned the right to have the title.
Yeah. Exactly.
That final thing is effectively only there because when you go, well, if you got the same amount of points, okay, well, goal difference, that's the same. What about goals scored? Yeah, that's also the same. Then you kind of go, oh, all right, well, all right, play each other on
head-to-head as well.
They've even introduced a head-to-head now. So if they've got the same head-to-head record, or if they've drawn both games, then you kind of go, all right, play each other one more and we'll figure it out.
For a neutral,
it'd be exciting. It'd certainly be exciting, no doubt.
It would be like Super Bowl.
Yeah,
pretty.
Yeah, we just got to hope that actually this year then that there's about 4 teams that all finish on the same points. So and then same goal score. So
this year's the closest it's been for a while.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. It's like, it's such a mental year because I'm kind of like, who has a realistic chance of winning it this year? Because all the teams you'd expect are so inconsistent.
Yeah.
Go on then. Wait, as of, what's the date recorded? This is the 24th of Jan. Who's going to win the Premier League title? For you?
City.
My money's on City as well, but that loss of De Bruyne is absolutely massive.
Yeah.
4 to 6 weeks without Kevin De Bruyne, that could change their season. Yeah. They've got Liverpool as well in that period, so it's about the worst time.
Well, the minute though, I'm not being funny. It's still a good time to play Liverpool at the minute.
Yeah, but 4 to 6 weeks out for Kevin De Bruyne, it's the kind of injury that could change the course of that season. But they look the most complete team at the minute. Kind of 5 wins out of 5, not conceding goals. Yeah, they're probably the favourites.
Yeah, they're probably the favourites. My money's on Leicester. Just
hey,
I'm not very good with money.
They're
right in there.
I just like.
I was going to say, you're not putting us down as dark horses, are you?
Not one of those. Anyway, so that was my unpopular opinion.
Okay, so Matt, do you want to run through your 10 unpopular opinions for us?
So, number 10, I slacked off Frank Lampard saying he doesn't deserve the Chelsea job. In number 9, I talked about, it wasn't very unpopular in the end, but I basically said that diving needs to have you need your legs chopped off if you do it. Much harsher punishment. Number 8 were that I believe refs should be mic'd up. Number 7, which is probably the most controversial, we argued for like an hour, was that I think a European Super League with relegation is
Move
an
on that one
interesting
quickly.
idea.
Move on that one quickly.
Barcelona-style elections should be more welcome in UK clubs. Premier League's responsibility to support the football pyramid. West Ham fans should get on with the move and stop moaning about Upton Park. Number 3 was that I think Neymar could have been one of the best. He could have been in the conversation of the 2 GOATs if, his ego hadn't got in the way. Number 2 is that I think positive feedback loops are bad for football. And number 1 is that all of the governing bodies aren't doing enough for racism within football.
Yeah, that's cool. And your 10, Simon?
My 10 are, number 10 was that the MLS-style penalties from the 90s, I can't remember what the exact year is, from the half, from 35 yards, were actually not the worst idea. Actually, a pretty good idea. I quite like them. Number 9, players should always celebrate against former teams, apart from maybe very slight circumstances where I'll allow them not to. Number 8, the Arsenal Invincibles were overrated. Number 7, VAR is and ultimately will be a good thing for football. Number 6, parachute payments should be scrapped. Number 5, which links to Frank Lampard point, top players shouldn't get top managerial jobs without the relevant experience. Number 4, I quite enjoy defensive football if it's done properly and well. Number 3, I think the academy structure of football needs a complete overhaul to stop big clubs being able to poach players from the lower leagues without any desire to actually develop them. Number 2, I think the gap between the League One and the Championship is now bigger than the gap between the Championship and the Premier League. And my number 1 was that Championship / Football League is ultimately more exciting than the Premier League.
Lovely stuff. So my top 10 are, I should say. Number 10, I've got Hazard was never the best player in the Premier League. Number 9, France's League One is not a farmers' league. Number 8, how a country's teams do in the Champions League does not impact on how good that league is. Number 7, Jurgen Klopp, bit of a moaner. Number 6, adding extra nations into the World Cup and Euros just waters down the quality. Number 5, football in post-Premier League era should not be compared to pre-Premier League era. Number 4, cup draws are irrelevant. Number 3, the betting culture in football needs to be toned down. Number 2, City and Chelsea get too much stick for the money they've spent. And number 1, style is overrated. So that's our top 10 lists. Thank you very much for listening. We'll catch you on the next one. That's the final whistle. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Midtable and Up podcast. If you enjoy our top 10 lists, please make sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. Let us know what you would have done differently. If you watch this episode on YouTube, make sure to put your foot through that subscribe button and leave a like on the video, as well as follow us on Spotify, the podcast app, to keep up to date with the series. Thank you very much. See you next time.